Thank you, Bill, so much for your incredible insight. Thanks for sharing the reality that we need to hear, as difficult as it is sometimes. Sharing your passion and building our passion to help us fight. We really appreciate it. We're so privileged you come to our community to share this with us. Now, I want to invite Amory Lovins to the stage. I see he's already made his way up here. You heard a lot of great things about Amory a few minutes ago, and I know you all now realize he's an incredibly intelligent person, one of the most intelligent people I've ever met. But one thing that you might not realize is he's also got incredible physical strength. Now, I've known this for many years, but I could never figure out how he did it. You heard what his resume looks like. How does he have time to work out when he's doing congressional hearings and writing books and doing all these speaking engagements? Until this time last year, Amy and I were getting ready to have a conversation with Robert Kennedy Jr., and he hands me his jacket to hold while he straightens his tie. And I reach out expecting the normal 226.8 grams of a fine wool dinner jacket and grab the jacket and almost fall to the ground. That thing weighs like 22.6 kilograms. That's 50 pounds for you holdouts out there, okay? So you may think, so I should have known this. So if you've heard Amory talk before, you've heard him say that every system component should have more than one purpose. And if you do it right, they should have 4 or 5 purposes. He often talks about a curved beam in his house that, I don't know, Amory, it has like 16 purposes or something like that. So I should have known that, of course, his jacket's going to have more than one purpose. So it's not just to keep him warm. It's not just to keep him in the top of style. It also carries every technical trick in the book. Any of you here see him last year? See the stuff he pulls out of his pockets? That's why it weighs 50 pounds. So Amory walks around with this 50-pound jacket, day in and day out, builds this incredible strength. Just a little tidbit I thought you ought to know. By the way, my name's Jeff Ramsdell. I'm a professor in the Department of Sustainable Technology and the Built Environment here at Appalachian State, and the director of the Appalachian Energy Center. I have the wonderful task again this evening to help facilitate a discussion between Bill McKibben and Amory Lovins and you, the audience here tonight, both participants of the Appalachian Energy Summit, the Appalachian Summer Festival attendees, and the general public that's here to join us as well. So let me tell you a little bit about how this is going to go. I have the mic right now, so I'm going to ask a couple of questions myself to get the conversation started. And then we have a new thing this year. These are called the mic box, and these are like a passing mic, and we're going to take turns. One will be in this aisle and another in that aisle, and we'll take turns. We'll take a question from this aisle. They'll pass toss, not throw, but toss the mic. And we'll go back and forth, so we'll get some questions from the audience as well. So to get it going, Amory and Bill, I want to focus in this little bit of time that we have on communication. Because again and again, when we talk about climate change and solutions that might help the effects of climate change or the continuation of climate change, I come across the barrier of communication. My wife is a great advocate of the environment and works every day to educate others about climate change. And she always attempts to start from where her audience is. But she often says that we have an identity crisis. And she also says that we're using the wrong words, that we use words like believe instead of understand. So, given recent successful rapid deployment of technologies like solar and efficiency technologies, Contrast it against the dreadful numbers of our Earth systems. How do we come together from those two endpoints to come up with a way to commonly communicate to all those, to people at all levels of knowledge regarding climate change? And I'll start with Amory.
So Alinsky said you should always talk to folks where they're at, not where you're at, and speak to their concerns in their language. And we've just heard a really good example of communication that works. So I think those of us that have been doing this a long time, my first paper on climate change was in 1968, have had to learn to give up the temptation or the possibly obsession with inflicting our truth on other people and listen a lot more. And you'll always find something they're concerned about. It might be, if they're in business, profits or jobs or competitive advantage. It might be national security, strong families and communities, public health, education, whatever it is. There's something there you can talk about, and it will ultimately relate to climate if you want it to.
Okay, thank you. Bill?
I think that's exactly right. This is the largest thing we've ever done, and that means that there are 1,000 ways that it impinges on all of us. So, I'm a Methodist Sunday school teacher, so when I often end up talking to church communities, you can't read past the first page of the good book without being reminded that our first task on the planet is supposed to be to take care of the place. If you've got people who have grandchildren, then they've reached the stage where they're very worried about what the world's going to look like, and with good reason, and need to understand that they cannot safeguard those grandchildren simply by piling up a bunch of money for them, because they need a world also in which to work, on and on and on down the list. I think the biggest problem, as I said, is often that people feel powerless and small in the face of it, and that's why movement building is so important. When we did those pictures I was showing you of those first demonstration, one of the things we did was rent out the jumbotrons at the end of Times Square that are normally like whiskey ads and things, and instead we were just flashing those pictures up every second. One of the reasons was to show the media in New York how big this was, but the other was so we could then take pictures of those huge pictures and send them back to people in the Congo and in Peru and stuff and say, look, you're a big part of something big, and allow people to begin to imagine themselves as a movement. That movement was large enough finally to force some action at Paris from world leaders this year. Not enough action, but a start. And if we keep building that movement, it will get easier and easier, I think. The job, in a certain sense, of activists and of movements is to change. One of the things they have to change, and perhaps the most important thing, is the zeitgeist, the sense of where the world is, what's going to happen, how it's going to work. And if you can do that, as happened, say, in our country around, say, gay marriage in the last 5 or 6 years, there was just a moment when it just became clear to everybody how it was going to come out, what the future was going to be, at which point the political resistance more or less melted away, and we made enormous and quick progress. This is harder because nobody makes trillions of dollars being a bigot, but people do make trillions of dollars from the fossil fuel industry, so it's harder, but it's the same basic principle.
It occurs to me that in your early efforts when you started 350.org, that one of the uniting factors of those people all around the world was this term 350. and that when you flash these pictures up and they see people from the other side of the world with a 350 as well, they feel that part of the group, part of the community. So how do we build words like that we can communicate every day within our community, not necessarily as part of a big 1 or 3 or whatever day demonstration,
Well,
but
I mean,
everyday conversation?
Think of that, I mean, better than words, actual images. I mean, look, one of the things that unites Americans and actually people all over the world and across ideology and across parties is a great love of solar panels. The polling finds that everyone, and I think Republicans as much as Democrats, like in the high 80s, like solar energy. And so when you see a solar panel, as you know, and there's a bunch of, I mean, it's really good to see all the solar hot water panels up on the top of some of the dorms here and things. Those instantly communicate something. And as we start to see them spread out across, that's why it's so sad that the utilities in North Carolina have made it more difficult to get solar panels up on the roofs of houses and things, because it quickly, that's an image that quickly infects our minds and helps spread this idea.
I just happen to have in my jacket pocket an interesting illustration of that. There's 1.2 billion people in the world, more or less, that are not on the grid. A lot more who have very little electricity, but these are people who simply live in darkness, except that they spend $38 billion a year buying kerosene for lighting, sometimes cooking. So they're spending a fifth of the total world cost of lighting services to get very inefficiently 1,000th of the world's light, plus huge health costs. So if those kerosene lamps were a country, they would rank 8th in climate emission or carbon emissions. Now, it has become possible for those people within their very limited means, household income maybe $2 a day or less, to banish darkness and teach their daughters and sons to read. This is an example of how you can do that. On this side is a very efficient solar cell. It charges up lithium batteries inside designed to sit in the tropical sun all day and not overheat. And on this side are very efficient LEDs, which will shine at this very high intensity for 10 hours on a day's charge, or knock it down 4 notches, 150 hours at this level. And you can finance the whole thing from your smartphone, which you recharge off this USB port. So an entrepreneurial woman in the village will lease it to you, or you can do it with scratch cards. And it pays back in weeks to months against kerosene, usually weeks. It's like getting a perpetual annuity that gives you an extra month's income every year.
And this is happening now.
Yeah,
on a
so we're
big
leapfrogging
scale.
over waiting for the wires, which we couldn't afford power from anyway, going straight to this stuff. In fact, one of our more interesting projects at Rocky Mountain Institute is in Rwanda, where the president wants to go from 22%, 24% electrified to 70% in about 2 years, and that's looking feasible now.
And these are people for whom 250 years of the fossil fuel age meant nothing, except that their climate was destroyed. And
this
now
sits on a
they can
Coke
go straight here.
Yeah, so there goes the last bit of Rockefeller's 156-year-old kerosene business.
That's it.
So how do we tie the climate message to those images? If we have the images of solar PV and we have these physical devices that we can let people experience all around the world, how do we give them the why? Why are those PV panels
Well,
mean
not
what they
everybody
mean to
has
us?
to. I mean, not everybody has to get always the why. I mean, it's enough for the people in Rwanda or in Bangladesh where this is happening very fast or whatever, simply to get the power, you know. But in fact, people in those places have a much stronger sense than most Americans do of what a changing climate means. They're not insulated in any way. They're the ones who are, watching their livestock die now because the drought comes. They're the ones who watch their house float away because the flood comes. They understand far better than most people exactly what the stakes are, and that's why we've done all kinds of great, we can show you a lot of pictures of people making beautiful 350s out of all the lights, just like the ones Amory was demonstrating. They get it. That's not the problem. The problem tends to lie in this country. Not to be the slightest bit partisan on the eve of our national conventions, but we have a presidential candidate in this country who announced that he believed global warming was a hoax manufactured by the Chinese, okay? Who apparently, in their devious Chinese way, managed to convince the world's glaciers, to go along with their conspiracy. The remaining pockets of foolishness on climate change and denial tend to be right near us.
But I think in the end, it is markets that will get us there. The oil companies, for example, are much more at risk from market competition than even from climate regulation, because they have more unsellable carbon than unburnable carbon. Oil's becoming uncompetitive even at low prices before it becomes unavailable even at high prices. And as I go around giving talks to the oil industry, and I'm a member of the National Petroleum Council, worked in that industry 43 years now, or to the electricity industry similarly, I find the executives are often rather shocked because they hadn't really seen the competitive landscape fully laid out before. And I sometimes show them a diagram with 8 Pac-Men surrounding utility revenues. These are the 8 Pac-Men of the apocalypse. All the things that are coming at them, they hunt in packs, they multiply quickly, and they don't add, they multiply, they exponentiate. If you're in trouble with one of those competitors like efficiency or renewables or flexible loads or storage or new business models or regulatory change, you're really in trouble with 2 and you're probably dead with 3, but there's 8 of them and they're all coming at you at once. It's just happening so much faster than many of the cultures and stakeholders in those industries can cope. And it's not going to end well for many of them.
Well, I certainly agree with you that the problem is more here than it is in developing countries as far as the understanding goes. And I hope that your words tonight will help at least inspire this 1,000 people or so that are sitting before you to go out and communicate to our community and beyond. I want to give the audience a chance to ask some questions now.
And I want to see how these things work.
Okay, so we're going to do it. So we have 2 helpers, Juan Diego and Haley. So is this Juan Diego? Oh, you're not Haley? Okay, well, I had a whole Haley joke. But so we need the Haley over here and Juan Diego. Okay, so the idea here is, I guess I better give out. The idea here is, if you have a question, say, "Hey, Haley." And if you're over here and you have a question, you say, "Hey, Juan Diego." And they will toss you the mic and you get to ask your question and we'll take some turns. So we're going to start over on the Haley side. Raise your hand. You just talk.
Can you hear me? Bill, when you were showing the slides of all the people that you'd seen around the world, what I was struck with is many of them are third world people, I'm assuming, second, third world, living lives of poverty that's forced on them by our lifestyles in some part. Even many of the people, I live a middle-class lifestyle, we all do here. Can you hear me?
I can't
Yes.
quite.
Okay.
I'm
There's a
not.
really bad echo over here.
There's a strange echo. Yeah.
Okay. Many of those people that were in the pictures that you showed from around the world are living third world lifestyles because we're kind of living on the backs of them. The oppression that they live under, in large part, in some substantial part, is enforced upon them by our lifestyles, not only the 1%, but even our middle class lifestyles, which many of us here are, if not all of us. 20 years ago, I attended the Luddite Congress in Ohio, and Gene Klein, different people were there. Wendell Berry was invited, but his sheep were folding and he couldn't make it, which was the perfect example of what that Congress was about. And my family was invited to stay with the people who were organizing the Congress. And they met that night before it started, and I was kind of privy to their conversation, and they were saying, so many of the conferences and different things going on are wonderful, but and there were reporters from all over the world there trying to wrap their head around what Luddites are trying to say, and or what that perspective's about. And what they were saying that night was, we're inviting people to think in perhaps a different way, to really make radical choices to disengage from this kind of state of agitation we're kept in with all these distractions around us, to continue to consume. And we continue to do that. All of us do. But they were offering us a different example to start disengaging from all of that, to remove ourselves from that wheel in those ways we could. And that there's the prophetic element to what the Luddites were trying to say to us 200 years ago, and what they were trying to re-inform us about and kind of reinvent again for the modern age as a response to global warming then, and as it's continued with radically different lifestyle choices. So I'm wondering what your thoughts were on that.
Sure. I actually was at that gathering, and I remember it well. It was good fun.
Yes, yeah, I remember.
There's two, as you point out, two slightly different questions here. And I've spent a lot of time on both of them. I wrote a book called Deep Economy that tries to address the question, I think that's one of the questions that's at the root of what you're talking about. It was an interesting project. It began with an observation, which was that when the public opinion pollsters ask Americans how happy they are with their lives, the percentage who answer that they're very happy peaked in 1956 and went downhill after that. I wasn't around in 1956, so someone else will have to say what was so good that was going on then, but I have a suspicion. I think that what happened was, in the post-war years, we spent most of our treasure on the project of building bigger houses farther apart from each other. And that had a strong environmental effect. It took a lot of energy to heat and cool those places and move between them, but it also had a strong sociological effect in that people ran into each other less often, just almost by the laws of Brownian motion, you know. And as a result, the part of us that's built for contact with other human beings, and we are, after all, socially evolved primates, not that long removed from the project of sitting around in the savannah taking lice off each other's fur, you know. That part of us kind of dried up. The average American has half as many close friends as the average American of 50 years ago. What's interesting about the moment in which we're living and about the technologies that Amory is describing, say solar and wind power, is that not only do they stand some chance of helping us deal with the environmental carbon crisis into which we've fallen, but they also offer at least a beginning into dealing with that problem too, in a way, I think. When engineers talk about what we're going to do in our energy future, the phrase they use over and over again is distributed generation. We go from, as Amory predicted 40 years ago, from a system of a few giant centralized power plants to a world in which there are, 10 million solar panels on 10 million rooftops, all interconnected in some kind of grid, okay? And where everybody is, where power is essentially local, where we're no longer dependent on a few scattered sources of fossil fuel, but on the omnipresent, if diffuse, sun and wind. That more local powered world will move us some degree back in the direction of neighborliness that we have begun to lose. And the other, we can see it happening in other places, maybe most dramatically. And I know that this part of North Carolina must be like Vermont in this regard. We can see it happening in our food systems over the last decade or two, okay? We've learned, again, begun to learn how to feed ourselves and our neighbors. Farmers markets have been the fastest growing part of our food economy the last 10 or 15 years. Now, partly that's because you go to the farmer's market and you get tasty, delicious food of the kind that the excellent dining staff has been serving up all day here, okay? So that's a part of it. The other part of it is when you go to the farmer's market, it is a different experience, okay? Y'all have been to the supermarkets, you know how that works. You walk in, you fall into a light fluorescent trance, you visit the stations of the cross around the perimeter of the market. That's perhaps you discuss the interesting question of debit or credit at the, at the exit. When sociologists followed shoppers first around the supermarket and then around the farmer's market, they found that when they went to the farmer's market, they were having on average 10 times more conversations per visit. Not 10% more, 10 times more. They were reknitting some of the community that we lost in that high consumer world that we built, okay? And that's important. That helps us deal with both these, because to some degree, one of the things we need to do is substitute some things for consumption. Yes, we should consume way more efficiently, but we also need to and would profit from remembering that we are creatures built for contact with each other and with the natural world. That's how we evolved, and that those things provide us great pleasure. It's especially, at risk of rambling on, it's especially worth remembering that in a college setting, okay? One of the things I'm always reminded when I'm at a college is, well, those of you who are here year after year know that when people come back for reunion, they always come through and they say, oh, those were the best years of my life, And when they say that, they do not mean, I wish I was taking Sociology 101 again. What they mean is, those were the 4 years of my life when I got to live the way that most human beings through most of human history have always lived, i.e. in close physical and emotional proximity to a bunch of other people. Sometimes that's a pain in the butt when someone's playing their stereo at 3 in the morning. Mostly it's a great pleasure to always have people around to bounce things off of, to work. I was over with that race car today there, and there's 20 kids there in the garage having an excellent time bouncing ideas off each other, working together on a shared project, whatever. The irony of American higher education is we take it as our job to train people to make enough money so they never have to live that way again, But it's worth remembering that there is a whole different idea about being human that's incarnated in some of the choices we make about materials like energy or food or whatever.
Great, thank you. Let's go to Juan Diego's aisle. Raise your hand high. Yes, sir.
Thank you, gentlemen. This has been a pleasure and an honor. My name is Norman. An observation I've made over the years is that relative to communication is that behaviors come from decisions and choices, and those choices come from beliefs. One of the beliefs I've encountered is that people believe they need petroleum, and for making plastics, certainly they do. They need to make gizmos out of it. But in your encounters, What are the inaccurate beliefs that you have most often encountered that are preventing people from making the choices that result in the behaviors that we need to be seeing?
Can't understand it.
What are the mistakes that people make in their sense of the world that result in kind of bad behaviors? What are people's
Inaccurate beliefs.
inaccurate apprehensions or beliefs of the world that
Well, it's a long list, but one of the most important is that what I do doesn't matter because there's 7 billion other people doing a lot of other stuff, and it's really probably more their fault than mine. The mess we're in comes from millions of individual choices and actions that each of us does all the time. The solution's going to come from millions of different, more mindful thoughts and actions that we can do all the time, and they'll add up to a different result. I mentioned how the reinventing fire scenario for the U.S. seems to be about on track for the first 5 years of that 40-year journey. Well, we're in press now on the Chinese equivalent of it, which was done by a four-way consortium we organized, starting with the Chinese government's top energy modeling and policy group, advised by another one of theirs that helps on policy with Lawrence Berkeley National Labs and ourselves, and RMI and the Chinese modeling group each put 27 people on this for 2.5 years. And basically we wrote the roadmap for China's revolution, not a word the party uses lightly, that the paramount leaders called for in the consumption and production of energy. Our customers were the authors of the 13th five-year plan, which was adopted in March. It went right in there. And what we found was together that China could use energy about 7 times more productively by 2050, use carbon about 12 times more productively, so shift most of the supply off fossil fuels, and save $3 or $4 trillion on the deal, and clean up the air and have the kind of economy and environment that they want, and meet their development and security goals. So they're very enthusiastic about that. And when you heard Bill correctly say how China's the world leader in renewable energy, I'll just give you the scale of that. In 2013 alone, China added more solar power capacity than the United States had added since developing it 59 years earlier. We have some catching up to do, but that means we're going to get all that stuff at the China price. It'll be like, sneakers and other stuff you find at Walmart, real affordable. So it's in the reach of each of us. We need to use energy in a way that makes sense and saves money. And it's not exotic. You can decide to get insulation and weather stripping rather than just pay a higher utility bill. You can decide to have a more efficient way to get around, or plan your life so you don't need to so much because you're already where you want to be and don't need to go somewhere else. And actually many of our younger generations aren't even wanting to own a car. It's cheaper and easier not to. You can save $10,000+ a year not owning a car that sits there 95% of the time eating interest and doing nothing. So I don't think the energy solutions we need require exotic knowledge brought to you by experts that just stepped off an airplane with slides. It's just common sense. There's a German philanthropist, formerly the biggest meat packer in Germany, Karl Ludwig Schweisfurt, who said 2,000 years ago, a man said, "Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do." But today he said, we need to say, "Forgive them, Father, for they do not what they know."
Amory, thank you so much. I'm afraid we have run out of time here this evening. Mr. McKibben, Mr. Lovins, we thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and insight, your participation in the Appalachian Energy Summit. I now call Sue Edwards to the stage for some closing remarks. She's here.
So I told you earlier today for those participants in the Appalachian Energy Summit that our theme was knowledge, collaborate, and action. And I think tonight's keynote certainly sort of incites action. So there's the challenge to you. Go out, collaborate with those around you, and make something happen. So thank you very much.